Part 23. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 222. The expression on Chen Miao's face was almost dull. She was naturally familiar with the name Zhong Yi, even more familiar than the name of the new champion Tang Ning. Ever since a certain collection of poems spread from Lingzhou to the capital, although the women in the capital who liked poetry and literature still complimented each other and called each other talented women, in fact, everyone knew in their hearts that they would never be able to reach the level of the most talented woman in Lingzhou in their lifetime. The name Zhongyi was a mountain in front of them. And now, this mountain was in front of her, and just now, she was still sneering at her. The poem of Magpie Bridge Fairy was not written by her. Zhongyi felt a little embarrassed, but she couldn't say it at this moment. She just smiled and said, "What talented woman? It's all rumors." "Miss, you are joking." Su Mei pointed to an empty pavilion not far away and said, "Su Mei has admired Miss Zhong for a long time. Why don't we go there to talk?" Zhongyi looked at her, a strange look appeared on his face, and said, "It turned out to be Miss Su. I have heard that Miss Su is unparalleled in appearance and is the most beautiful woman in the capital. After seeing her today, I know that the rumors are not exaggerated at all." The two walked towards the pavilion one after the other, and the crowd that had been quiet was noisy again. "Is she the legendary Lingzhou talented woman? I remember that the first place winner was Lingzhou Jiwen before him, Lingzhou Jiwen, Lingzhou talented woman, they are husband and wife. Oh my God, no wonder, one is a poetry madman, the other is the first talented woman, who is more suitable than them. Zhongyi and Tang Ning are both names they are familiar with, but they never thought that they are actually husband and wife, but after knowing this, they feel that they should have been husband and wife." In a pavilion somewhere in the center of the lake, the lights illuminated the pavilion quite brightly. Zhongyi looked at Su Mei and was slightly absent-minded. When she first came to Beijing, she had heard of the title of the most beautiful woman in the capital. Others only said that Miss Su Mei was born with an unusual beauty, rare in heaven and hard to find in the world. She did not take it seriously at the time. When she saw her today, she realized that any rumors were based on facts. Even though she was very confident in her appearance, she could not help but feel inferior at this moment. The woman in front of her was the most beautiful woman she had ever seen. This kind of beauty does not only refer to appearance, but also a kind of charm that emanates from the bones and belongs to women. Seeing her staring at her blankly, Su Mei smiled slightly and said, "Miss Zhong." Zhongyi came back to his senses and realized that he had been rude just now. He looked at her and said in admiration, "Miss Su is the most beautiful woman in the capital. No wonder so many people admire her." Su Mei smiled and said, "How can Su Mei be the most beautiful woman in the capital? There are countless people prettier than me in the capital." Tang Zhuangyuan once said that Miss Zhong is the most beautiful woman in his heart. Zhongyi blushed slightly, then looked at her and asked, "Are Miss Su and my husband familiar with each other?" "I am familiar with them." Su Mei thought for a while and said, "He won the first prize at the Tianrunju Lantern Festival Poetry Festival. We met at that time." The 10 Lantern Festival poems were still kept in her study. Zhongyi naturally knew about this. She looked at Su Mei and felt that she was not a vixen who would seduce her husband as Yao Yao said. She looked at Su Mei and said, "Thank you Miss Su for helping me out just now." "It's not really helping me out." Su Mei looked at her and smiled, "I have really admired you for a long time. I have read all the poems you wrote and have always wanted to meet you. Unfortunately, I just returned to Beijing and have too many things to do. I have never had time. When I am done with my work in a few days, I wonder if I can visit Miss Zhong's home and ask you for advice on poetry." Zhongyi smiled and said, "Miss Su is too modest. I have heard that Miss Su is proficient in everything from playing the piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting to playing the flute. I also want to ask Miss Su for advice on music." Su Mei smiled and said, Let's not call each other girls. I'm a few years older than you. If you don't mind, just call me Sister Su. I was invited to the party tonight, and there were 2 more sisters for no reason. Zhongyi didn't know what it felt like. When she looked at Sumei, she nodded gently and said, Sister Su. Sumei stood up, walked over and held her hand, saying, there's nothing to do now, why don't I take my sister to stroll around the garden, the night view here is also very good. Sir, the cakes you asked for. After the waiter of Tianrunju handed him a paper-wrapped cake, Tang Ning walked out of the main building of the restaurant. Xiaoju waved to him and said, I'll go back first. It's too late to go back, and the old man will be worried. Tang Ning waved to him and walked towards the waterside pavilion in the center of the lake. King Kong was very happy tonight and got drunk. He was carried back by the servants of the palace. The others were not much better and were still lying in the elegant pavilion. Tang Ning didn't drink much. Before leaving, he asked the kitchen to make an extra cake for Xiao Xiao to try. After all, it was King Kong who was treating him, so there was no need to save money for him. Men were not allowed to enter the center of the lake, so he waited under a tree by the lake. During the process, he opened the paper bag and pinched a piece of cake to taste. It tasted good. Before he finished eating a piece of cake, a figure began to walk out on the corridor leading to the shore. Tang Ning walked to the entrance and saw Zhao Yuner and others walking out, but did not see Zhong Yi. She asked doubtfully, Miss Zhao, where is Xiao Yi? Zhao Yuner smiled and said, she is still inside and will come out in a moment. The number 1 scholar should wait here for a while. Several women around Zhao Yuner couldn't help but scream in surprise. He is the number 1 scholar. He is truly a talented person. It's so thoughtful that you come here to pick up Miss Zhong in person. Hey, please give in and let me take a look. Tang Ning originally wanted to wait here for Xiao Ai to come out, but for some reason, the women who were about to walk ashore suddenly stopped leaving. He took a few steps back cautiously until he bumped into a figure. He turned around quickly, lowered his head and said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Tang Shui rubbed his chest, looked at him, and said, you can't see the road clearly at night, so be careful where you step. Tang Ning was stunned, it's Miss Tang. It's your sister. It's not a kiss. What did you say? I said. Tang Ning thought for a while, then raised the paper bag in her hand and said, this pastry is delicious. Do you want a piece? No need. Tang Shui shook his head and said, I will arrange for you to meet my sister-in-law as soon as possible. You shouldn't have anything to do these days, right? No. Tang Ning shook her head and said, just tell me when the time comes. Tang Shui felt a little disappointed when he saw his understatement and didn't care at all, but he didn't say anything more. He pinched a piece of pastry from his hand and said, I'm leaving, you go back early. After Tang Shui left, Tang Ning saw Zhong Yi walking towards the shore from the promenade in the middle of the lake. He put away the pastries and went up to meet her, only to find that there was another person beside her. Wake up. He looked at Sumei and asked, why are you here? Zhong Yi looked at him and said, Sister Su took me around. Tang Ning asked in surprise, Sister Su? Zhong Yi smiled, looked at Sumei, and said, Sister Su, let's go back first. Sumei nodded and said, be careful on the road. Tang Ning walked out with Zhong Yi in a daze. It took a while before she came back to her senses and asked, how do you know each other? We just met. Zhong Yi smiled and said, we even talked about our husband-in-law. Tang Ning was stunned, talking about me, what are you talking about me? Zhong Yi looked at him and asked, Sister Su said that in my husband's heart, I am the most beautiful woman. Is this really what my husband said? Unexpectedly, Su Hu was so kind to him, and was willing to be his wingman and help him seduce his wife, so he spent all his time making sachets for her in vain. Tang Ning held her hand and nodded, of course, in my heart, your wife is the most beautiful woman in the capital. Zhongyi looked up at him and asked, but how did my husband and sister Su decide who was the most beautiful woman? This chapter is first published like Have Voice Novel Network, please remember the URL. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 223. Tang Ning looked at Zhongyi. Shouldn't the point be that in his heart, she is the most beautiful woman in the world? Why is her focus so strange? As for why he talked about this issue with Sumei, it was actually Sumei who asked him that day whether he would consider keeping a vixen who is the most beautiful woman in the capital, and then Tang Ning used this reason to sternly reject her. This is of course not to be said. He has recently felt more and more that Xiao Yi seems to have inherited the true teachings of his mother-in-law. Fortunately, he always flips over twice every 2 days, and has already gained a little experience. He said with a serious face, that day, Miss Su said that she is the most beautiful woman in the capital. Of course, I am not convinced. In my heart, my wife is the most beautiful woman. Not only the most beautiful woman, but also the most talented woman. Miss Su can't compare to you. Zhongyi took his hand and asked, what about Xiao are you? Tang Ning's expression was stunned again. The questions she asked were becoming more and more difficult to answer. Tang Ning was looking forward to June coming soon so that he could take Xiao Ai back home. If his mother-in-law taught her a few more tricks, he would be overwhelmed. He was really worried that one day she would ask him who he would save first if she and Xiao fell into the water. Both sides of the hand were made of flesh, and it would be wrong to save either one first. Anyway, there was a big swimming pool at home. After moving in, he must teach them how to swim to prevent accidents before they happen. Tang Ning looked at her and said, I have suffered from face blindness since I was a child. I don't know who is beautiful or not. I am with you not because you are beautiful, but because you are the most important people to me. In my heart, you are all the most beautiful people in the world. Zhongyi leaned on his shoulder with a happy face and said, Sister Su is beautiful, Yao Yao is also beautiful, I can't compare to them. Who said you can't compare to them? Tang Ning pinched her nose and said, you think some people are beautiful because you haven't seen them drooling when they sleep. There are also some people who are called the most beautiful women by people. You think she is very ladylike, but in fact, she likes to call herself old lady behind her back. She may also be dishonest when she sleeps, likes to grab the quilt, and always falls under the bed. Tang Ning has seen many people who look glamorous on the surface but sloppy on the inside. Don't look at Sumei who looks glamorous and beautiful, in fact, she may not even wear a belly band inside. Zhongyi nodded, and said nothing more about Sumei. He looked at Tang Ning and whispered, my husband, I just saw my cousin. Cousin? Tang Ning looked at her and asked in surprise, you have a cousin in the capital? It's cousin Tang Shui. Zhongyi stretched out his left wrist and said, she also gave me a bracelet, saying it was given to her by her mother. Tang Ning was silent for a while, then smiled and patted her hand, saying, in that case, you should accept it. He and the Tang family had a life and death feud that was irreconcilable, but there were two people in the Tang family that he could not hate. One was this cousin Tang Shui who had no blood relationship with him, and the other was his nominal mother whom he had never met. It was always strange to call someone who had no sense of belonging in his heart mother, but he also felt that no matter what, he should go to see her, which was also an explanation for this body. In the quiet courtyard of the Tang mansion, in the dimly lit room, the beautiful woman held a hairband in her hand and looked at it blankly. After a long time, she carefully put away the hairband, and when she looked at Tang Shui opposite, she suddenly asked, Shui-er, where is your bracelet? Tang Shui smiled and said, I gave it to my sister-in-law, Aunt. I met my sister-in-law today. She is as beautiful as my aunt, and she is also a famous talented woman. My cousin will be blessed if he marries her. The beautiful woman listened to her with a smile, stood up, walked to the cabinet, and took out a small box from the cabinet. She opened the box, took out a bracelet from it, walked to the table, took Tang Shui's hand, and helped her put it on. Tang Shui looked at the bracelet that was exactly the same as the one she had given away, and murmured, "And this?" The woman looked at her and smiled and said, "These bracelets are originally a pair." Tang Shui thought about it, and immediately took off the bracelet again, saying, "And, no, this is what you passed on to me." Why not? The woman put the bracelet on her again and said, "We are all family, so don't say anything polite." Tang Shui looked down, smiled, and said, "Thank you, aunt." Early in the morning, after Tang Ning finished practicing, he lay comfortably on the grass. He originally wanted to lay blue bricks here, but when he thought that no matter how strong the blue bricks were, they would not be able to withstand a kick from Tang Yejing, he simply asked them to repair it and plant a piece of grass. Xiao Xiao only ate one piece of the cakes he brought back yesterday. The old beggar said that she couldn't eat anything during this period of time. The old guy was really good to her precious apprentice, so he kept the cakes for breakfast. There were only 3 of them in the mansion now. The old beggar was the little coach and cook, and Tang Ning had to take care of his breakfast by himself. This situation would not improve until Xiru and Xiaoi moved in, but Ching that silly girl, was always clumsy and couldn't even tell the difference between being hard and not being hard. He had to find time to buy or recruit a few smart maids. He lay on the grass to rest for a while, and when he was about to go over to eat the cakes he had saved for breakfast, he saw King Run sitting there, throwing the last piece of cake into his mouth. King Run burped and quickly took a sip of water before asking, "Where did you buy this? It's so delicious." Tang Ning looked at him, turned around and walked towards the kitchen. "From now on, anything you eat must not be left outside." King Run followed him and asked, "Sir, what are you doing today? Can I follow you and learn from it? When I learn it, I will cook it for the Wang family's sister." After eating his breakfast, she also wanted to learn how to cook and pick up girls with him. Tang Ning was not satisfied with this disciple at all. Look at what kind of disciple the old beggar has taken in. He is a martial arts prodigy, and he is so handsome and charming. Look at his disciple again. Although he looks like a dog, he only knows how to eat, and he is a fat ball. If you don't learn well at a young age, you have a set of love words to pick up girls. What can he learn from himself? How to cook. He is a prince, and Tang Ning will not teach him how to cook. If he teaches a prince to be a cook, he is not sure whether Huang Chen will treat him as a dish. Learn to pick up girls. One of his wives has hair, and the other seems to still have hair. This little fat guy is much better at picking up girls than him. If he can be a little thinner, much thinner, the world still doesn't know. There will be Hua Guduo who will be harmed by him in the future. He was busy in the kitchen, preparing to make a bowl of egg custard. King Run stood at the door of the kitchen and watched intently. Royal Palace. Concubine Shu looked at Emperor Chen helplessly and said, "Your Majesty, you can't be too spoiled by Yuan, and you can't let him go outside the palace to play all the time." Chen Huang smiled and said, "He likes to play, so let him play to his heart's content. I will let Ling Yun follow him, and nothing will happen." Concubine Shu looked at him, sighed, and stopped talking. It doesn't seem like a bad thing if he doesn't have to face the intrigues in the palace and can be happy all the time. Emperor Chen stayed at Concubine Shu's place for a while, then got up and went to the study. The treaty with the Chu state had been negotiated very clearly, and the Chu state's envoy was about to leave Beijing. The biggest issue in the recent past between the DPRK and China would also be settled, which made him feel relieved. Wei Jian took a step forward and said, Your Majesty, this is the book that King Duan and King Kong just handed over this morning. In order to train them, King Duan, King Kong, and King Huai all participated in political affairs. Unfortunately, King Huai had not done much. King Duan and King Kong spent their energy fighting with each other, which made him extremely disappointed. He opened a folder, read it, and then threw it aside. In Prince Duan's folder, there was nothing except a roundabout attack on King Kang's wings. He opened another one, and after a moment, a strange color appeared on his face. He put down the memorial and said, "Call the Imperial College to offer wine and ask the three of them to come over." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 224. In the Imperial Study Room, King Duan, Kong, and King Huai stood side by side, and the Imperial Academy stood in the back with their heads bowed while offering wine. Emperor Chen looked at Prince Kong and said straight to the point, "Chen, please tell us in detail what you mentioned in the booklet today about the reconstruction of printing regulations." After Chen Huang finished speaking, King Huai's face was expressionless, and a trace of vigilance immediately flashed in King Duan's eyes. King Kong stood up and said, "Back to my father, I feel that the Imperial Court's regulations on publishing books are not perfect and there are many omissions. As for the specific details, the officials of the Imperial College need to discuss it." Chen Huang looked at him with no expression on his face, but he couldn't help but feel a trace of doubt in his heart. He thought about it again and again, but he never thought about the benefits to King Kong or the harm to King Duan by re-establishing the book publishing laws. Based on his understanding of the two sons, it was neither self-interest nor harmful to others. They won't do it. King Duan, who was standing next to King Kong, was even more puzzled and immediately became a little wary. King Kong wants to trouble the Imperial Academy this time. Is there some kind of trap? Even if there is no trap, he will definitely object to what King Kong wants to do. The big loss he suffered last time makes him feel a little distressed when he thinks about it now. He took a step forward and said, "My father often taught us that running a big country is like cooking small dishes. You should not disturb the fish while cooking, and you should not be troubled when running the country." A few days ago, the Imperial Court made some changes in the printing of books. If you just feel that if any law is inappropriate, it would be a waste of time and effort to amend it at every turn. Chen Huang did not respond immediately, but began to think again. If it is necessary to change, in fact, every law and order can be modified. Some are insignificant and there is no need to improve them. For the purpose of governing the country, maintaining stability is better than changing. He looked at King Huai, who had been silent since he came in, and asked, "Rui, what do you think?" King Huai raised his head and said, "Father, I think that what the two royal brothers said has a certain truth. In the end, I have to ask my father to make a clear decision." Emperor Chen glanced at him, waved his hand, and said, "Okay, you all can go down, and the Imperial Academy will stay for the wine ceremony." The three of them left the Imperial study. King Huai bowed his hands to them and said, "The two royal brothers should go to pay their respects to the two empresses. I will go back to the mansion first." King Kong and King Huai looked at him and nodded at the same time. King Huai was no opponent to the two of them. He had no foundation or background in the court, and his mother and concubine died of illness early. Among the three, he was just a foil. The threat to them was not much greater than that of King Run. The two of them were the opponents who needed to be wary. They looked at each other and each walked towards a palace. A moment later, in concubine Tang Hui's chamber, Prince Duan sipped a cup of tea and said, "I wonder what tricks Zhao Cheng is playing this time. No matter what, we can't let him get what he wants." Thinking of something, she looked at the woman in palace clothes opposite and asked, "Mother, concubine, has my father revealed to you the candidate for Minister of Household Affairs?" The woman in palace clothes looked at him, shook her head and said, "Your Majesty never talks about state affairs when I am here. This is all the fault of that scoundrel. If my sister-in-law could have agreed to that marriage, we would have had another helper in the court now." A fierce look appeared on Prince Duan's face, and he said, "How much thought have I spent? He only had a Minister of Household Affairs in his hands, and now he has ruined everything." Concubine Tang Hui frowned and said, as a junior, should not make unreasonable comments on the matters of the elders." Prince Duan put down his teacup, took a deep breath, and said, "My child made a mistake, please don't blame me." At the same time, in another part of the palace, a beautiful woman in palace attire looked at Prince Kong and asked, "Why is Cheng so happy today? Could it be that your father praised you?" "My father didn't praise me," King Kong smiled and said, "but here, my child, there is one thing that makes me happier than being praised by my father." The beautiful woman in palace clothes looked at him and asked with a smile, "What is that?" King Kong took a sip from the teacup and recounted what had just happened in the palace. Concubine Zhang Xian looked at him doubtfully and asked, "If that's the case, why didn't you explain the benefits of this move to your father just now?" King Kong smiled and said, "Of course I have to say it, but not now, but in the morning meeting tomorrow." He was secretly glad in his heart that his original thoughts were exactly the same as those of his mother and concubine. But after Xiaoju's suggestion, he realized that there was no point in talking in the imperial study. He wanted to stand in the court in front of all the civil and military officials. In front of him, he slapped Wang Duan hard in the face. He wanted to tell everyone that he, Zhao Cheng, had a unique vision and understood the sufferings of the people. Zhao Ming was not worthy of carrying his shoes. Xiaoju taught him how to get the maximum benefit from the same thing. In the imperial study room, the Imperial Academy's wine ceremony had just retired. Emperor Chen put aside Prince Kang's brochure and also forgot about the contents on the brochure. King Kong was eager to do something, but he only relied on enthusiasm and no detailed planning, which made him a little disappointed. Even these trivial things, as long as he thought about it carefully, it would be left to him. It doesn't hurt to do it. However, compared to before, he has undergone some changes now. It is gratifying to finally stop fighting with King Duan. He was leaning on a chair to rest, and a figure came in from outside the door, holding a jade bowl in his hand, and cautiously walked up to him. Chen Huang looked at him and asked, "Yuan, what's going on?" Zhao Yuan held the bowl in front of Emperor Chen and said, "I made a bowl of egg custard. Father, please try it and see how it tastes." Emperor Chen looked at the delicate and smooth egg custard in the bowl and said in surprise, "Did you make this?" Ling Yun stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, this bowl of egg custard was indeed made by His Royal Highness Prince Run. The royal chef just helped His Royal Highness put the bowl into the pot. Could it be that you inherited your mother's cooking skills?" Smelling the fragrance of the egg custard, Emperor Chen forgot to scold him for being a prince and not being so naughty. He couldn't help but pick up the spoon and tasted it. Prince Run blinked and asked, "Father, how is it?" Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "It's a little salty, but the rest is fine." "Did Yuan learn this from the imperial chef?" Zhao Yuan rolled his eyes and murmured, "It's salty. When I cook it for Wang's sister tomorrow, I should put less salt." "What? Nothing. I learned this secretly when the teacher was cooking today." Zhao Yuan smiled and said, "Father, eat more. The teacher said that it is rich in protein, which can improve brain function and protect the liver, and then, in short, it is very good for the body." After that, he ran out quickly. Emperor Chen looked at him with a smile and said, "Wei Jian, pour me some water." Although the egg custard was salty, Emperor Chen still ate it all, without wasting a bowl. Although he had many descendants, Yuen'er was the only one who could have this heart, whether they were adult or underage princes and princesses. This bowl of egg custard was better than any delicacies from the mountains and seas for him. A young eunuch walked up slowly and said, "Your Majesty, it's time to eat." "Take it down, I'm full." Emperor Chen stood up and murmured, "How can what they make compare to my son?" He smiled and said, "Go to Shuxiu Palace." There were only 3 people in the house. Tang Ning washed vegetables and washed pots and dishes by himself. He felt that he was not used to having no maids around him. It was a bit sad to think about it. In just 1 year, he had fallen to this state. The former 5 good youth was now also poisoned by the feudal society. No matter what, he had to recruit a few maids as soon as possible. If there was a chance, he would ask Xiaoju if there was any good channel. Maids were easy to find these days, but maids who knew their roots and were clean were rare. He sat in the pavilion and watched the old beggar teach Xiao to practice martial arts. He glanced inadvertently and saw someone walking in from the front yard. There was no gatehouse outside the house. He just closed the door. When Xiao Yi and the others came, they would push the door in by themselves. It was not Xiru and Xiao Ai who came this time, but Sumei. Tang Ning walked over and asked in confusion, "Why are you here?" "I'm not here to see you." Sumei glanced at him and asked, "Is Sister Zhong here?" They had only known each other for less than a day and she was already calling each other sister, but Suhuli was destined to be disappointed today. Xiao Ai would not move here until after June. He shook his head and said, "If you want to find Xiao Ai, go to the county government office. She is not here, and she will not move here for more than half a month." "What?" Sumei was stunned when she heard this, and then said happily, "She is not here." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 225. Tang Ning looked at Sumei, who was beaming with joy, and asked, "You seem happy that she's not here." "No." Sumei shook her head and said, "It's such a pity that she's not here." Tang Ning looked at the slightly upturned corners of her mouth, but she didn't see any regret at all. She looked at Sumei and said, "Go to the county government office to find her. I'm a little sleepy. Let's take a nap first." Sumei walked briskly towards the inner courtyard. "Hey, stop, you can't sleep here." Tang Ning quickly stopped her. Although Xiao Yi was not here now, there was no guarantee that she wouldn't come soon, and Fairy Tang might appear at any time. If they found Sumei lying on his bed, they would really be trying to catch her. Bed. Sumei turned around, stretched out 2 lush green fingers, and touched his shoulders. Tang Ning was unable to take another step. "Be good and be obedient. My sister will buy you sweets when she wakes up." She smiled charmingly at Tang Ning and slowly disappeared from Tang Ning's eyes. The old beggar came over from the side, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "Peach Blossom Tribulation, Peach Blossom Destiny, it all depends on your luck." After being patted on the shoulder by him, Tang Ning could move again. "What Peach Blossom robs Peach Blossom fate, Peach Blossom nunnery in Dawao." He rubbed his shoulders, turned around, and saw Tang Yao Yao walking in from outside. As she walked towards the inner courtyard, she said, "Let me see what it's like inside your home." "Wait a minute." Tang Ning held her wrist and said, "I have something important to tell you." Tang Yao Yao shook off his hand and asked, "What's the matter?" Tang Ning looked at her and said, "About the bookshop. Tang Yao Yao has been taking care of the bookshop these 2 days." Hearing this, she looked at him and asked, "Do you have any new ideas?" "I know how to deal with those shameless pirated booksellers." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Let me tell you in detail." Tang Yao Yao waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about this, I'll go in and take a look first. You can read it anytime. I have to go back to the county office now. Let's talk as we walk." He grabbed Tang Yao Yao's arm and walked outside while saying, "In the future, if anyone dares to steal our books, we don't need to destroy his shop, the government will come looking for him." I'm not going to the county government office. I just came back from the county government office. Let me tell you, Xiaoai has a new bracelet. It's very beautiful. I'll show you later. I've already seen it. Look at it again. In the imperial palace, above the golden palace, the mourning dynasty has not yet begun. King Kong stood at the front with a somewhat impatient expression on his face. According to his original plan, he would tell the whole story about the copyright law in the morning of the next day, and show his face harshly in front of his father and the courtiers. Unexpectedly, my father fell ill for some reason that day. According to the imperial doctor, he probably ate something unclean and suffered from diarrhea. The strange thing is that the imperial chef in the imperial dining room was not punished. Due to his father's illness, the morning court meeting had been postponed for 3 days, and he was already waiting impatiently. After finally waiting until the mourning dynasty started, the minister of Hubei stood up first and said that the ministry of Hubei was busy with affairs, and now the position of minister of Hubei was vacant. It should be arranged as soon as possible to avoid missing important events in the court. Immediately afterwards, regarding the position of Minister of the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel recommended several important ministers. After hearing this, he felt a little relieved. Among these people, although there is no one from him, there is also no one from Duan Wang. Even if they cannot take advantage this time, fortunately, they will not suffer a loss. The Minister of Household Affairs is very important and will not be decided so easily, but he should be among the recommended people. The decision will probably be made in the next morning meeting. After finally waiting for the matter to end, before he could stand up, another censor accused a certain gentleman of the court of being disheveled and buttoning the wrong button when he went to court. These censors have the most shit. Even he was impeached every 3 days. As long as it wasn't a big case like the one Tang Zhao committed last time, such as buttoning the wrong button and farting during the morning court, it was just a formality. Finally, when no one stood up, he took a step forward and said, "Father, I have something to report." Chen Wang's face was still a little pale. He looked at him and said, "What's the matter?" Reporting to the emperor, I learned that many famous scholars in the world have spent their whole lives writing books and biographies, but the final results have been pirated and copied everywhere, leaving them impoverished and unable to make a living. Such behavior is no different from theft. King Kong bowed and said, "So I sincerely ask my father to establish a copyright law to curb unhealthy trends." As soon as King Kong opened his mouth, many ministers in the court were already guessing that he was setting another trap for King Duan. But after thinking about it, this matter seems to have nothing to do with King Duan. Not only that, but the implication of King Kang's words seemed to be that he wanted to intervene in the publication of books. They thought about it, but they did not think of what benefits it would bring to King Kong to facilitate this matter. It can't be that King Kong really pities those who publish books, right? King Duan stood up from the side and said, "Father, legislation is a matter of great importance and should not be taken lightly." Emperor Chen nodded, looked at Prince Kong, and asked, "Chen, since you said you want to legislate, how should you enact it? Do you have any ideas about the details?" A smile appeared on Prince Duan's face. If Prince Kong hadn't acted impulsively every time, his father would not have asked him this question. King Kong also smiled and nodded, "Yes." Emperor Chen was also a little surprised and said, "Tell me about it." King Kong nodded and spoke slowly. There are 5 benefits to the court's establishment of copyright law. First, cracking down on pirated book publishers is a protection for authors. Those famous scholars who have devoted their entire lives to leaving their works to future generations should not end up in poverty. Second, pirated books are also expensive, but there are many misprints and omissions, which may mislead students. Third. Fifth, if pirated booksellers are willing to pay a certain copyright fee, they can print books. Part of these fees will be returned to the legitimate booksellers, and the other part can be returned to the national treasury. After King Kong finished talking, he handed over a memorial in his hand and said, "Father, I have written in detail about many matters related to the copyright law in this memorial. Please read it." As early as when King Kong said the second point, Prince Duan's smile had already frozen on his face. He actually made such sufficient preparations. All the officials were also surprised, and the look they looked at King Kong changed slightly. Today, the points listed by the King Kong are clear and well reasoned, and each reason is convincing. He is completely different from the previous one. On the other hand, the Prince Duan seems to oppose the King Kong just for the sake of opposing him. One is not for personal gain, but for the fairness and justice of this world, and the other is only for power, and strikes dissidents regardless of the reason. The difference is obvious. Emperor Chen took the memorial and read it for a long time. He showed satisfaction on his face. He looked at the King Kong and nodded, saying, "Very good, since you have such a thorough consideration, this matter will be handed over to you, Chen-er." Kong suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and said, "I will not disappoint my father's expectations." Tang Ning just came back from Tangrenzai and officially started selling it today. Because it has been preheating and promoting it in the past few days, everyone has high expectations for it. Today, the bookstore has not opened yet, and there is a long queue on the street. Starting from today, at most 5 days, pirated copies will appear in major bookstores. I don't know what the situation is with the King Kong. He walked back to his room. Su Mei was lying on his bed, but she was not asleep. She was sitting with her legs crossed and reading a book. Tang Ning walked over and took a closer look. Only then did he realize that she was reading a secret book on dual cultivation that he had hidden under his pillow. He had studied it last night. Seeing Tang Ning coming in, Su Mei closed the book, glanced at him, and asked, "Your wife doesn't know martial arts? Who are you going to practice this with?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 226. Suhuli is an outsider, how can she control who she practices with? If she doesn't practice, can't she just watch? Although Xiaoi and the others haven't officially moved in yet, she has temporarily regarded this place as a fox den, but this does not mean that she is the mistress of this place, and she has no right to control him studying martial arts secrets. Moreover, why does she, a virgin, always pretend to be an old driver? Can she discuss this kind of thing with me? Tang Ning took the secret book from her and said, "I'll just take a look." Su Mei asked curiously, What, don't you feel uncomfortable looking at this?" Tang Ning said expressionlessly, "No." "No," Su Mei looked at him and said regretfully, "then there is really a problem. Don't you know the imperial doctors? Have you asked them to see you? Whether there is a problem or not, don't you know, Suhuli is very good at talking, and she drives at any time. If you want to cure her, you have to drive faster than her." Su Mei was stunned, and her face couldn't help but blush when she thought of what happened that morning. She looked at Tang Ning, her eyes flickering, and suddenly said, "Why don't we just practice together? You are also that, and I am also that, so neither of us will suffer." Okay, Tang Ning nodded and began to untie his belt. "Damn hooligan," Su Mei glared at him and quickly covered her head with the quilt. The little girl still wanted to fight him. Tang Ning glanced at Su Mei, who was hiding in the quilt like a turtle, and turned to walk out the door. Tang Yao Yao walked into the yard and asked, "Xiaoi asked me to ask you, are you going back to eat today?" Tang Ning was too lazy to cook or wash the dishes, so she said, "You go first, we'll go right away." Su Mei walked out of the room and said, "It just so happens that I also want to see Sister Zhong, let's go together." Tang Yao Yao looked at Su Mei, who came out of Tang Ning's room, and after a moment of stunnedness, she frowned at Tang Ning and asked, "Why is she here?" It was better for Tang Yajing to see her coming out of the room than to catch her in bed. Tang Ning explained, she came to find Xiaoai. Tang Yaoyao put her hands on her hips and said, don't lie to me. Why did she look for Xiaoai? Is she familiar with Xiaoai? Su Mei glanced at her and said, whether they are familiar or not, you will know when you see Sister Zhong. Tang Yaoyao straightened her chest and asked, Sister Zhong, who is your Sister Zhong? Tang Ning hurriedly pulled her back and whispered, calm down, you can't beat her. He understood Tang Yaoyao's feelings. From childhood to adulthood, she and Xiaoai have been like sisters. Now suddenly someone came out and wanted to break her sisterhood. Naturally, she felt uncomfortable. But what if she felt uncomfortable? She couldn't beat Suhuli. If she could do whatever she wanted when she felt uncomfortable, Tang Yajing would have been beaten by him long ago. Tang Yaoyao glared at him and whispered, who said I can't beat her? If she felt that she could beat Suhuli, she would have challenged her long ago and would not have spoken so softly. Su Mei looked at her and smiled, how about we compete? Let's compete. Tang Yaoyao was covered by Tang Ning before she finished her words. He pulled Tang Yaoyao out and winked at Su Mei, signaling her to stop and sleep here obediently. After all, Tang Yaoxin is narrow-minded. If she is bullied by her today, she will remember it for a long time. Why are you pulling me? When they walked out of the house, Tang Yaoyao opened his hand and said dissatisfiedly, I just can't stand her look. Tang Ning let go of her arm and comforted her, you are a reasonable lady Tang, why bother with her? Tang Yaoyao stamped her feet in anger, and then asked, why doesn't she leave? You leave her here alone. She will leave by herself in a while. Don't think I don't know, I saw it last time. Is she trying to sleep in your bed again? Tang Yaoyao was a little indignant and said, of course, there is nothing good about your broken bed. Tang Ning whispered Gu said, then you have slept with him too. Tang Yaoyao raised her eyebrows, what did you say? Tang Ning looked at her and changed the subject, I said don't guess blindly. I heard that your father wrote to urge you to return to Lingzhou quickly. What are you going to do? This method really worked. Tang Yaoyao said with a look of disapproval, he wants me to go back. He must want me to get married as soon as possible. If I don't go back, can he come to the capital to arrest me in person? After leaving Lingzhou, Tang Yajing was like a wild horse that had broken free from its reins and a kite that had broken its string. It would be difficult for him to go back. To be honest, if he was the rich man Tang, he would have a headache with such a daughter. When he and Tang Yaoyao walked to the gate of the county government, they saw the housekeeper of the Kongwang mansion again. He was directing some people to move several large boxes off the carriage. Seeing Tang Ning, he immediately came over with a smile on his face and said, young Master Tang is back. Tang Ning looked at him, pointed at the boxes, and asked, what is this? The butler smiled and said, this is a small gift prepared by His Royal Highness Prince Kong for young Master Tang. Please accept it. Tang Ning thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, did His Royal Highness Prince Kong say anything? The butler smiled and said, His Royal Highness asked me to tell young Master Tang that the matter was settled. Judging from the size of the gift sent by King Kong, this matter should go smoothly. It is very likely that Emperor Chen directly handed over this matter to King Kong, and the person in charge of printing books was the Imperial College. From then on, you can insert your own hands in it openly. That's good. Tang Ning nodded and said, I don't live in the county government anymore. You can ask them to move things to the Tang mansion over there. If you walk a little further, you will see that the gate of the mansion is not there. Guan, just put your things in the yard in front and send them to the Tang mansion over there. Okay, the housekeeper responded, and then said to everyone, have you heard that? Bring the things up first, and then send them to the Tang mansion over there. When entering the county government office, Tang Yaoyao looked at Tang Ning and asked, what happened? Tang Ning explained, it's the copyright law I told you about last time. Oh, Tang Yao Yao said listlessly and walked towards another courtyard. Tang Ning looked at her in surprise and asked, "What are you going to do? Are you not going to eat?" "I won't eat anymore," Tang Yao Yao waved his hand and said, "I'm going to practice my sword." "I don't know why are you practicing swordplay while eating?" Tang Ning glanced at the direction she left, shook her head, and stopped caring about her. In another courtyard, Tang Yao Yao was wiping her sword and murmuring to herself, "After a big disturbance, here comes another vixen, Xiaoi, please be more careful." After Tang Ning finished her meal, she returned to the house and planned to see what Prince Kong had given her this time. As soon as she stepped into the courtyard, she saw Prince Run sitting alone in the pavilion in the courtyard, with several palace guards standing in the distance. Under the tree. This time should be the end of school time for the palace school. The children of the princes and nobles in Beijing will accompany the young princes and princesses to study in the palace school. Logically speaking, this little fat girl should be playing with her Wang sister in the palace at this moment. It is really strange to come here. What's even more strange is that he didn't touch any of the delicious pastries he asked Su Mei to bring over from Tianrunju on the table. Tang Ning walked over and asked curiously, "What happened? Did you have a fight with your sister from the Wang family?" King Run covered his chest and said sadly, "Sir, please don't mention the Wang sister again. Now whenever I think of her, my heart hurts." Tang Ning looked at his sad look and asked in surprise, "Does she like someone else?" King Run shook his head and said with a painful look on his face, "Sir, do you know how good I am to her? Whatever she wants to eat, I ask the imperial dining room to give her whatever she wants. She doesn't like to eat Gongxiu's food. I do it every day, let the imperial chef prepare it and serve it to her with my own hands. I want to learn how to cook delicious meals with you and learn how to cook it for her to eat. I made the egg custard and let my father try it first. He ate my eggs. Gen was ill for 3 days, and my butt was swollen from the spanking. I could only stand and listen in class. I liked her so much that I wished I could give her all the delicious food in the world, but she never. I brought plum cakes outside the palace and only ate them myself. She knew that I like plum cakes the most, but she didn't even give me a piece." The young man's voice was choked with sobs and he was extremely sad. Tang Ning sighed. The boy's most innocent love was gone forever because of a piece of plum cake. He thought for a while, but in the end he couldn't think of anything to say to persuade him. Even when he was at his most sad and frustrated, his thoughts were still so clear, which made Tang Ning, who had never been in love and even wanted a wife from the state, feel ashamed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 227. It's just a piece of plum cake, what about it? When Tang Ning brought a bowl of assorted casserole in front of him, King Run still maintained the posture of sitting quietly. He rarely glanced at his favorite assorted casserole. Instead, he looked at Tang Ning, shook his head and said, "Sir, you don't understand. I'm not sad because of that piece of plum cake. I'm sad because she doesn't have me in her heart. A 10-year-old girl knows what liking means, but not all children are as precocious as him." Tang Ning didn't understand the matter of love. He pointed to the bowl of assorted casserole and said, "Eat whatever you want today. Eat as much as you want." Tang Ning said she could eat as much as she wanted, and Zhao Yuan could eat as much as she wanted. He made a whole pot, but King Run only left one bowl for him. Falling out of love can actually increase one's appetite. Just as Tang Ning picked up the chopsticks, Tang Yao Yao's figure appeared opposite him at the right time and said loudly, "You actually secretly made an assorted casserole." She snatched the bowl from Tang Ning's hand and snatched his chopsticks at the same time. Assorted casseroles were also her favorite. Tang Ning sighed. It was difficult to snatch food from a tiger's mouth, and it was also not easy to snatch food from the hands of her Tang fairy. He might as well make do with the pastries Su-mei brought him. Gililu. Today, after listening to King Run talking about his daily life with the Wang sister all afternoon, he was already very hungry. Smelling the aroma of the food, he screamed uncontrollably. Tang Yao Yao had already picked up a piece of tofu with her chopsticks. When she heard the strange sound, she looked at Tang Ning and put her chopsticks down again. She pushed the bowl over and said, "You can eat it, I suddenly don't want to eat it." She stood up, held the sword, and said, "I'm going to practice." King Run looked at Tang Ning and said, "She likes you." Tang Ning picked up a piece of tofu and asked, "What?" King Run looked at Tang Yao Yao's leaving figure and said, "She likes you." Tang Ning ignored him and continued eating. A little brat knows what it means to like. A piece of plum cake or a bowl of assorted casserole is considered to be liked. Adults' liking is far more complicated than foodies like them think. He finished his meal, put the bowls and chopsticks aside, and walked into the kitchen. King Run leaned against the kitchen door and watched Tang Ning make the assorted pot again. He had watched it many times and already understood the steps of making the assorted pot. If he watched it a few more times, he would be able to try it himself and let his father try it. Taste it? He looked at Tang Ning, who was busy in the kitchen, and then at Tang Yao Yao, who was practicing swordplay in the courtyard. He had a clear expression on his round face, like a wise man. Tang Grenzai. A month ago, the largest bookstore in the capital was Wanjinlu. Now, the number one bookstore in the capital has changed its position. In terms of scale, Tang Grenzai is the undisputed overlord of the bookstore street. It is said that the manager behind Tang Grenzai was a woman. She spent a lot of money to acquire several medium-sized bookstores and merged them into one, which is today's Tang Grenzai. Tang Grenzai has just opened, and there is already a long queue at the door. I don't know what to publish in the second volume of The Palace of Eternal Life, so why can't it be published in one go? It has the same virtue as The Romance of the West Chamber and The Peony Pavilion. If these two novels hadn't been written in very different styles and used very different words, I would have almost thought it was written by the same person. I almost thought it was Li Qing who returned to the world. However, what kind of talented woman is this Tang Ning? As a woman, she could write such a soul-stirring and majestic work. Her talent and love will never be inferior to Li Qing's. This year is really weird. All these great talents and talented women are popping up, but I haven't even heard of them before. In the Tang Renzai, Manager Su walked out of the shop and looked at the customers lining up, with a smile on his face. He was originally a clerk at a medium-sized bookshop on Bookshop Street. After the bookshop was acquired and merged into Tang Grenzai, some of the clerks and stewards left, but he stayed. Now it seems that he was very wise when he chose to stay. Steward Su, Tang Grenzai has just opened and the business is so good. Congratulations, a laugh came from the side. Steward Su turned around and recognized the other person as a member of Wanjinlu. Steward. Manager Su looked at him and asked, "Manager Zhang is so free today, why are you here?" Manager Zhang looked at the long queue in front of the Tang Renzai and said, "There is no way, our Wanjuan Tower is not like your Tang Renzai. With so many guests, we will naturally be busy. I'm not as free as Manager Zhang." Manager Su looked at him and said, "I'm going in to get busy." "Hey, don't be anxious." Manager Zhang stepped forward and said, "I came here this time because I actually have something to discuss with Manager Su." Manager Su looked at him and asked, "What's the matter? Isn't this Palace of Eternal Life produced by your family?" Manager Zhang smiled and said, "Our boss said that he is willing to spend a lot of money to buy the entire book of Palace of Eternal Life. Can Manager Su help you?" "Shopkeeper." Manager Su looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, we won't sell this Palace of Eternal Life. The shopkeeper has already given the order, So please take it back, Manager Zhang. Manager Zhang smiled and said, Manager Su, don't rush to reject people thousands of miles away. You should know the strength of Wanjuan Tower. If we are serious, we can print out your previous day's publication in one day at most. At that time, my shopkeeper may not be willing to spend that amount of money. Manager Su's face looked a little ugly. If the normal printing speed is used, it will take about 5 days for every volume produced by Tang Renzai to be pirated by other bookstores. But if a large bookstore like Wanjinlu is willing to invest a lot of manpower in typesetting and printing day and night, pirated copies will leak out in just one day. This is a major blow to them and will even affect more than half of their business. But there was nothing he could do to stop it. The government will not care about these matters, which is also the tacit understanding of major bookstores. However, although all bookstores will pirate copies, they will not do it as brilliantly as Wanjinlu. It will usually be delayed for a few days. Although the business of the original bookstore is still they will be affected, but as the rule is, they won't say much. What Wanjuan Tower did this time was to steal it. Manager Su said with a sullen face, aren't you afraid of being cast aside by major bookstores like this? Manager Zhang smiled and said, if we are willing to sell the template to them, I think they will be very happy. You. Manager Su pointed at him, but in the end he just waved violently and strode into the shop. Manager Zhang looked at him with a smile and said, Manager Su, remember to convey what I said to your shopkeeper. You bastard, I'm going to smash up his shop. The Palace of Eternal Life had only been released for one day, and pirated copies appeared on the market. There was a long queue at the entrance of Wanjuan Tower, which was longer than the one at the entrance of Tang Renzai. Tang Yaoyao slapped his hand on the stone table, stood up, and strode head outside. Tang Ning hurriedly pulled her back and said, I am from a girl's family. I don't want to be a mother-in-law all day long. I want to be a lady. Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said softly, how about they smash up their store? Tang Ning's arms were visibly covered in goosebumps, and she hurriedly said, don't worry about this. They will have to spit out as much as they eat in a few days. King Kong had already sent over the preliminary provisions of the copyright law, and Tang Ning had to suggest that he add a fine for piracy, which would make them feel painful and make them remember it. Tang Yaoyao finally calmed down and asked, where did Xiaoi go? Tang Ning pointed to a room and said, my mother-in-law called me in to talk. Tang Yaoyao asked in confusion, why does Auntie often ask her to come in to talk recently? Tang Ning was also very strange. He originally thought that she was going to get married soon. Mother and daughter were deeply in love and had endless things to say. But recently, whenever Xiao Yi stayed with her mother-in-law, he couldn't help but feel chills running down his spine. He didn't know what's going on. If you love reading novels, how can you not pay attention to this public account? V-letter search, RDWW444 or popular online articles. Let's chat about online articles together. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 228. What did mother say to you these days? Tang Ning had been hiding doubts in her heart. When she was alone with Zhong Yi, she finally couldn't help asking. Zhong Yi smiled and said, they are just women's words. My husband can't listen to them. What the mother-in-law said to her daughter before the wedding, Tang Ning thought about it and felt that it would be better not to ask any more. If it was really a shameful topic, all three of them would be embarrassed. Zhong Yi looked at him, blinked, and suddenly asked, my husband, didn't you notice that I was different today? Tang Ning looked at her and asked in confusion, what's different? I changed a pearl flower today. Tang Ning looked at her carefully and immediately smiled and said, this red hairpin suits you very well. No wonder my wife looks so beautiful today. So beautiful today, Zhong Yi looked at him and asked with a smile, didn't I look good yesterday? Tang Ning was stunned. He thought for a moment and said, Yesterday was prettier than the day before yesterday, today is prettier than yesterday, and tomorrow is prettier than today. My wife is changing my perception of beauty every day. Tang Ning finally found out what was different about Xiao Yi. It was clearly a conversation between his mother-in-law and father-in-law in the study room that he accidentally overheard. Fortunately, he heard one more sentence and listened to his father-in-law's answer. Otherwise, he would be stumped by her questions today. He also roughly guessed what his mother-in-law had said to her in the past few days. It seemed that he should communicate more with his father-in-law and ask the fat man Run Wang for advice in the future. Even if Xiao Yi only learned a little bit of his mother-in-law's skills, he would be better off in the future. After he finished speaking, he immediately stood up and said, "I'll think about who to invite on the wedding day and send someone to send the invitation as soon as possible." Tang Ning knew that his skills were not as good as his cunning father-in-law, so he decided to find an excuse to avoid the limelight. Not long after he left, Tang Yaoyao came in and sat opposite Zhang Gai. She poured a sip of tea, took a sip, and a thoughtful expression appeared on her face. Zhang Gai looked at her and asked, "What are you thinking about? So absorbed?" Tang Yaoyao thought and said, "Auntie just told me something, and I'm wondering if it's right." Zhang Gai asked doubtfully, "What did my mother tell you?" "She said that to see if a person likes you, look at him for 10 breaths. After 10 breaths, if she can't help but kiss you, she really likes you." Tang Yaoyao crossed her arms and suddenly looked at Zhang Gai, eager to try. "How about we try it?" Zhang Gai looked at her and said uncertainly, "We." "Oh, let's try it." Tang Yaoyao sat opposite her, holding her face and looking into her eyes. Zhang Gai blushed slightly when she was stared at by her. The two people were very close, and they could feel each other's breathing, and then their breathing became a little chaotic. "Xiao, you are so pretty." Tang Yaoyao looked at her for a while, blushed, and said, kissed her on the face, then stood up and said, "I'll go and help you test him." She walked out of the yard and looked at Tang Ning standing in the pavilion. After thinking for a while, she strode over. She disagreed with what Aunt Chen said that she would kiss someone only if she liked him, but this could test her charm. If he really dared to kiss her, he would be so bold and have improper thoughts about her sister. She would beat him up and make him give up. If he didn't kiss her, it meant that she was not attractive in his eyes. He actually thought she was not attractive, so she would find a reason to beat him up a few more times. Tang Ning sat in the pavilion, thinking about who to invite on the 9th day of the 6th lunar month. He didn't have many friends, and there were only a few of them. Li Tianlan must be invited. She was about to leave the capital, and there would be few opportunities to meet again. Su Mei would also be invited. If he didn't invite Xiaoi, she would invite her. It depended on whether she had time by then. Needless to say, Tang Yaoyao was not a guest at all in the Zhong family. Xiaoju could not be left out either. As for Gu Bai, this guy was too stuffy and too lecherous. If Gu Bai didn't invite him, then Kui Lang and the others would be fine. In addition, Fang Shilang's family also had to send an invitation. There was also Tang Shui. Tang Ning wrote a name on the paper, thought about it, erased it, and added it after a while. He pinched a piece of cake, took a bite, and hesitated. Tang Yaoyao walked in from outside the pavilion, sat beside him, and looked at him straight in the eyes. Tang Ning looked at her and asked in confusion, "What's the matter?" Tang Yaoyao just looked at him and didn't say anything. For some reason, she just looked at him like this. The distance was so close that Tang Ning always felt guilty. In addition, he couldn't help but want to kiss her. He quickly suppressed this impulse, not knowing what Tang Yejing was up to. Seeing that she was still staring at him, he thought for a moment and handed over the half cake he had left, asking, "Do you want to eat it?" Tang Yaoyao still looked at him without saying anything. Tang Ning thought for a moment, pushed all the cakes over, and said, "All for you." Tang Yao Yao left without eating the cakes, and the look in her eyes when she left was not right. Tang Ning stuffed the remaining half cake into his mouth and sighed, "What a weird woman." He picked up the pen, thought for a long time, and finally crossed out the name Tang Shui. Tang Renzai. Manager Su looked at the official in the shop and said, "Master official, you just said that as long as we report it to the government, no one else can print our books." The official looked at him and explained patiently, "As long as you report to the government and pay the copyright management fee of 10 taels of silver, even the Imperial College will not be able to print your books without your consent in the future. This is His Royal Highness Prince Kong. I sympathize with you and worked hard to implement the copyright law. Do you want to report it?" Even though the other party was just a manager of a small bookstore, he was extremely patient. After all, this was a matter assigned by His Highness Prince Kong. His Highness took this matter very seriously. If they messed up, His Highness would not let them go. Manager Su looked happy. 10 taels of silver may be a lot for ordinary people, but for Tang Renzai, it is just a matter of selling a few more books. If they can be protected by the government, the bookshops in Wanjinlu will no longer publish their books. I don't know how many more 10 taels of silver I can earn from books. This is a business that is sure to make a profit without losing any money. What's more, the boss has already given instructions for this matter, and he is just acting according to the order." Manager Su immediately nodded and said, "Yes, yes, of course." Not long after registering, the official took the money and said, "Very good, from now on, no one can print this Eternal Life Palace without your authorization from Tang Renzai. If you find anything, you can report it to the government immediately. The government will punish you severely in accordance with the law. If you want to authorize others, you can go to the Copyright Office of the Imperial College and report again." Manager Su smiled and said, "Thank you, Lord Official." "Hey, Manager Su is busy. If I remember correctly, the second volume of your Palace of Eternal Life will be released tomorrow, right?" Manager Su looked towards the door and saw Manager Zhang from Wanjuan Building walking in from the door with his hands behind his back. He looked at Manager Su and said with a smile, "Have Manager Su informed your boss about what I said last time? I wonder what he said." Manager Su looked at him and asked, "You should have made a lot of money by stealing our first volume, right?" Manager Zhang smiled and said, "It's not much. I just sold more than 1,000 copies and made a small profit of 1,000 taels of silver." Manager Su turned to look at the official and said, "Brother the official, you heard it just now. He said that Wanjinlu pirated our books and made a profit of 1,000 taels. According to the law, they should be fined 2,000 taels, and the 1,000 taels are charged return it to the national treasury and give us 1,000 taels as compensation." 1,000 taels. The officer showed a smile on his face and said, "Go to Wanjuan Tower." Manager Zhang looked at the scene in confusion and asked the manager, "What are you talking about?" Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 229. Wanjuan Tower. A middle-aged man in rich clothes was sitting in the back hall, taking a sip of tea. A waiter walked in from the front hall, knocked on the door, and said, "Shopkeeper, that's almost sold out again. Why don't they hurry up and print it when it's out of stock?" The middle-aged man put down the teacup heavily and snorted. The guy immediately said, "Yes, I'll go rush you right away." The middle-aged man picked up the teacup again, but the expression on his face was not good looking. Since the Wanjuan building was closed down last time for selling books banned by the Imperial Court, he had spent a lot of effort and a lot of money to reopen the bookstore. Those banned books were originally a huge source of revenue for the bookshop, but now that the court has tightened their inspections, this road has been almost blocked. Wanjinlu's profit for the new month has immediately dropped by half. Although business has been booming these past 2 days, the root cause is that someone else is taking credit for it. They cannot start from the source and find Tang Ning Ning. Tang Renzai eats meat, and they can only drink soup. He was planning this matter in his mind, when suddenly a waiter ran over from the front and shouted, "It's not good, it's not good, the shopkeepers is bad." The middle-aged man patted the table and said angrily, "I'm so panicked, what happened?" The guy said in a panic, "Several officials came and took away everything we were selling." "What?" The middle-aged man was shocked when he heard this, and immediately stood up and walked to the front hall. In Wanjuan building, in the shop in the front hall, an official opened a scroll that was for sale outside and asked, "Everyone has taken the stolen goods, what else do you have to deny?" As soon as the middle-aged man came out of the back hall, Manager Zhang ran over quickly and said a few words in his ear. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly stepped forward and said, "This official brother, we at Wanjuan Tower don't know this is happening." "Don't know?" The official raised his eyebrows and asked, "If you don't know, you can do whatever you want, and if you don't know, you can bully and dominate the market." The middle-aged man took out a piece of silver from his sleeve, quietly put it into his hand, and said, "Brother, official officer, please do it for your convenience. We promise to act in accordance with the law in the future and we will not dare to do it again. You want to bribe me for 10 taels of silver." The official picked up the silver, weighed it in his hand, put it in his arms, and then said, "We are also under orders to do things, so naturally we can't be bribed by you. Let's do this. Since you are the first offenders, hand over all the illegally obtained money before tomorrow and pay the same amount of fines, and your store will not be closed." After that, he walked out of Wanjuan Tower and said, "Go to the next one." The shopkeeper of Wanjinlu stood there with a doubtful expression on his face. He thought for a while and said, "You guys look at the store first, I'll go out for a while." The Wanjuan Tower has been able to operate in the capital for so long, and it has been able to make a comeback after the last seizure. Naturally, there is some background. However, when he walked out of a high-end mansion in Beijing, his face was completely gray. Just now, he gave him a huge amount of filial piety every month, and told him bluntly that he had to accept all the punishments from the government in this matter, otherwise, it would not be as simple as the bookshop being closed down. He didn't dare to ask further, so he hurried back to prepare a fine. The backer had said so, and naturally he didn't dare to make any sense. It's just that this incident happened suddenly, but it was like a storm. In this industry, I'm afraid things are going to change. In one day, major bookstores in the capital removed a book from their shelves and paid fines honestly. If the people in the capital wanted to buy this book that sparked a short-term craze, they had no choice but to go to Tang Renzai. This directly made the entire street in front of Tang Renzai Gate become extremely crowded, making it difficult for cars and horses to move. Tang Ning no longer had the time to worry about these things. Today was the first day of June, and the days until the wedding were numbered. He had to personally handle who he wanted to invite and what food and drinks he wanted to serve that day. There is one more thing that needs to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. Before the 9th day of June, he had to recruit some maids and servants into the house. This matter could not be postponed for a day. The servants don't need to worry too much. Let Lu Lao choose a few disciples who are more diligent and clever. They usually just visit the door and run errands. It is much better than being a beggar. The maids had to serve in the inner house, and their character was very important, so Tang Ning decided to choose her herself. Xiao Ai was called by his mother-in-law again. He had just seen his third aunt and Xiru talking mysteriously. He wanted to find someone to accompany him to see the maid, but he could only find Tang Yao Yao. Fairy Tang was sitting in the pavilion in a daze. Tang Ning walked over and sat next to her, looking at her as she looked at herself yesterday. Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and asked, "What do you see me doing?" Tang Ning asked, "What did you see me doing yesterday?" Tang Yao Yao's face turned red when she thought that she actually looked at Tang Ning yesterday. After looking at her for a long time, She felt the urge to kiss her. Tang Ning asked in surprise, "Why are you blushing?" Tang Yao Yao glared at him and said, "My face can turn red if I want to, and white if I want to. Can you care about that?" Fortunately, Tang Ning was used to her being confused and said, "I'm going to recruit some maids. Do you want to go take a look?" "Don't go." Tang Ning nodded and said, "Oh, then I'll go find Miss Su. She's familiar with this capital." Tang Yao Yao finally decided to go with him because she also needed to buy some maids for her house. In fact, it was unnecessary for her to buy a house. She could just live with them alone. If she had to buy a house and a maid, she would have too much money to spend. When she walked out of the door, she met King Run. He insisted on going with her, so Tang Ning went with him. King Run followed him and asked, "Sir, can I come on the day you get married?" Tang Ning said nonchalantly, "If you can leave the palace, come." "Oh, my father won't let me leave the palace at night." King Run thought for a while and said, "Sir, please leave me a meal. I will come over to eat it the next morning." In Chen State, people cannot be trafficked, but they can be bought and sold. If a trafficker is caught, he will definitely die, but if it is a consensual transaction, only a deed of sale will be required, and this kind of transaction can be protected by the government. To buy a maid, you need to go to the Yahang to find the nanny first. Before Tang Ning walked into the Yahang, she saw a lot of people standing on the adjacent street corner. King Run pointed at a girl wearing coarse clothes and asked, "Sir, are they? Why is there a straw stuck in his head?" Tang Ning looked at the girls on the street corner. The older ones were 13 or 14 years old, while the younger ones were only 7 or 8 years old. They all had straws stuck in their heads. Tang Ning glanced at the girls' faces one by one. Their expressions were dull and confused, with a hint of fear. He stood there for a while and then explained, "This straw is called a grass label. The straw label is inserted into something to indicate that it can be sold." King Run was puzzled, but they are human beings. How can humans be bought and sold like things? Even if King Run called him sir, Tang Ning could not explain this problem to him. They stood there for a moment when a woman in coarse clothes came over and said with a smile on her face, "Master, do you want to buy a girl? It only costs 7 taels of silver, which is twice as cheap as in the dental shop." Seeing this woman approaching, many people gathered around the corner. "Sir, my girl is smart and can do laundry and cooking. She only needs 6 taels of silver. Young master's families, ours only costs 5 taels. 4 taels, young master, as long as you give us 4 taels, you can take this girl away immediately." "Go away, go away, go away." A woman in slightly brighter clothes squeezed in from the outside, looked at Tang Ning, and said with a smile, "Young master is here to buy a maid, right?" "I am the Yama here, young master. Please come inside." Although these little girl movies outside are cheap, they have not been trained. If you buy them back, you have to spend time teaching them the rules. It is not cost effective. What we have here are maids who come from wealthy families. They know the rules and etiquette. The young master can do it. Take your pick. I bought them all. Before Tang Ning could speak, a voice came to her ears. Tang Yao Yao took out a banknote from her arms, waved it in front of those people's eyes, and said, "You go to the county office first, I'll be there in a minute." "Thank you girl, thank you girl." There was an uproar from the crowd, and the women threw aside the straw on the girls' heads, pulled them and walked quickly towards the county government office, where the deed of betrayal needed to be issued. Na Yapo looked at Tang Yao Yao, then at Tang Ning, pursed her lips, and murmured, "Young master." "Forget it." Tang Ning waved her hand and walked with Tang Yao Yao in the direction they came from. The maids educated by rich families are certainly sensible and do not need to be retaught the rules, but who made their kind-hearted Tang Nuxia feel compassion? Although she is a little violent, a little impulsive, and a little silly, Her heart is as kind as ever, and she is still the lovable little fairy in essence. King Run followed Tang Ning. He hadn't said a word since just now, and there was a rare look of thought on his chubby round face. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 230. Tang Yao Yao brought back 8 girls from outside. The oldest of them is 14 years old, 2 years younger than Qing and the youngest is only 8 years old. If in later generations, they would be properly employed as child laborers. But in this era, 14 is no longer young. Although not many girls get married at the age of 14, Tang Yajing, who is already 17, can already be regarded as a big girl. Su Mei, who has passed her 20th birthday, that's an absolute old girl. The parents of those children, after handing over the deeds of sale, some said a few words to them with love and sorrow on their faces, and some took the money and left, not wanting to stay one step longer. The 8 girls, no matter how big or small, stood timidly, lowering their heads and pinching the corners of their clothes. Tang Yao Yao looked at them, not knowing how to arrange it for a moment. Tang Ning was not surprised when she saw the troubled look on her face. She had always done things on impulse without a plan. Seeing how pitiful these children were, she bought them back. However, after buying them back, she could not let them fend for themselves. If she let them go back, she would probably see them again in a few days. Standing in the street with straw in his head, Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Go and call Qing." Although Qing is a little silly and clumsy, she is the eldest maid in the family. In fact, she arranges all the chores in the Zhong mansion. You guys take a shower and change your clothes first, and then I'll tell you what you should do on a daily basis. As the eldest maid, Qing's business ability is still very strong. She took the girls to bathe and change clothes, arranged rooms for them, and arranged the cleaning and serving tasks one by one. The 2 younger ones did not just let them make the specific arrangements. Xiao Xiao stood next to Tang Ning, looking at the sudden appearance of people in the yard. She held his hand nervously, but her eyes were still on those girls. She is actually 13 years old, but she looks thinner than those girls from poor families, and her mind is closed to a large extent. There are more peers in the yard, hoping that she can slowly open her heart. Qing walked to Tang Yao Yao and asked, "Sister Yao Yao, did you buy these little maids?" Tang Yao Yao glanced at her and asked, "I bought it, what's wrong?" "But Sister Yao Yao, why don't you buy those maids from wealthy families? You can save a lot of things." She looked at Tang Yao Yao, scratched her head and said, "My uncle said that girls with big breasts are stupider. But you have no breasts, and you are not smart at all." Tang Ning held Xiao Ru's hand and said, "Let's go find Sister Xiao Ru. The next scene may be a bit cruel. There is a price to pay for telling the truth." Qing a silly girl, actually likes to seek death more than him. She really is not a family, and she doesn't enter the same family. When he and Xiao Xiao walked out of the yard, Qing was already pressed on her legs by Tang Yao Yao and her buttocks were whipped hard. After a moment, Qing covered her butt and kept a distance from Tang Yao Yao. When she saw her raising her hand, as if she still had something to say, she immediately said, "Sister Yao Yao, I was wrong. You are not stupid at all, you are the smartest. Yes, girls with big breasts are stupid. Your breasts are smaller than mine, so you must be very smart." Tang Ning and Xiao Xiao walked out of the house. Qing's screams became even louder. Royal Palace. After Emperor Chen finished reviewing the memorial, he rested for a while, and then a young eunuch came forward to announce that King Run had arrived. Chen Huang got up from the couch and said, "Let Yuan come in." Zhao Yuan walked in with a food box in his hand and said, "Father, I made assorted pots, do you want to try them?" Emperor Chen's expression changed, and he lay back on the bed and said, "Father, you are not hungry now, so Yuen'er can eat by herself. Then Yuen'er will leave some for father." King Run put the food box on the table, took out a bowl, divided half of it, and then started eating by himself. Chen Huang leaned on the bed, looked at him, and asked, "Why does Yuen'er like cooking so much?" Zhao Yuan stuffed something in her mouth and said vaguely, "Because Yuen'er wants to make delicious food for his father and mother." Chen Huang looked at him and asked with a smile, "Don't you want to give it to your Wang's sister?" King Run paused while picking up the vegetables. Huang Chen smiled and said, "If Yuen'er likes the little girl from Prime Minister Wang's family, my father will betroth her to you as your princess in 2 years, okay?" Zhao Yuan was startled, then shook his head and said, "Yuen'er thanks my father, but Yuen'er doesn't want the marriage." "Why?" Chen Huang said in surprise, "don't you like the Wang sister the most?" "Like is a matter of one person, marriage is a matter of two people." King Run whispered, raised his head, stopped talking about the matter, thought about it, and said, "Father, I saw someone on the street today. Many things have straw stuck on them." The husband said that if they are stuck with straw, it means they can be sold. Emperor Chen nodded and said, "People will put things that are not needed temporarily on the street and put straw on them, so others will know that this thing is for sale. But I also saw many children with straw stuck in their heads." King Run raised his head and asked doubtfully, "The children are temporarily out of use. Why do their parents want to sell them?" Chen Huang explained, "Maybe their family can't afford food, so if they sell their children to a wealthy family, the family can survive." King Run lowered his head and looked at the food in the bowl, and then asked, "It's very uncomfortable to be hungry. Why can't some people even afford to eat?" Chen Huang opened his mouth and wanted to explain, but he didn't know how to explain. As a king of a country, his people sell their sons and daughters because they cannot afford to eat. This is not something worth showing off. King Run looked up at him and said, "Father, they are so pitiful. Their parents abandoned them for 4 taels of silver. Can we help them?" "Yuen'er, you don't understand these things." Emperor Chen sighed. He didn't want all the people to have enough food and clothing, but there were so many poor people in the world. Even if he drained the national treasury, it would have little effect. He touched King Run's head, stood up, and ordered, "From tomorrow onwards, order the Ministry of Household Affairs to build porridge sheds at the 4 gates of the southeast, northwest, and northwest in the name of King Run. 1 porridge will be given out every day at noon. Time, lasts for 1 month." Wei Jian looked at King Run, smiled slightly, and said, "I obey the order." The third uncle and the third aunt were both restless. When they were in Lingzhou, they had saved a lot of money. In addition, Tang Ning gave them money to buy a house in the capital, and there was still a lot left. "I have been running around outside for 2 days, thinking about buying a store and continuing to do my job." Tang Ning strongly supports this. He hasn't eaten old yogurt for a long time. When he brought Xiao Xiao over, he was stopped by the old beggar halfway, saying that it was her time to practice, so Tang Ning had to come over by herself. Xiru was rarely busy. Tang Ning walked into the courtyard. She was sitting on the stone bench in a daze. Tang Ning walked up behind her, hugged her from behind, and asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" "Brother Xiaoning, you're here." Su Ru was startled. When she realized it was him, her face turned red and she hurriedly tried to break away, but Tang Ning hugged her tighter and said, "You'll be mine soon, and you called me Brother Xiaoning." Su Ru's pretty face was already red to her ears, and she whispered, Sister Zhong is here." Tang Ning put her hand on her waist and smiled, "You still want to lie to me?" "Sister Xiru didn't lie to you." Zhong Yi walked out of the room, walked up to them, and said, "My husband took advantage of my absence and bullied Sister Xiru again." "What do you mean by taking advantage of you when you're not around?" Tang Ning put one arm around Su Ru and the other around her, and said, "When you were around, I even bullied you too." After a while, he sat on the stone bench, with Zhongyi and Suaryu leaning on his shoulders respectively. With the beauty in her arms, at this moment, Tang Ning felt once again that God didn't play a joke on him by letting him come into this world. In the other world, he no longer has any relatives, but here, there are people he loves and people who love him. He looked up at the sky, his memory turning with his thoughts. There was a figure there, from blur to clarity. Tang Ning looked at the face that was etched deep in her memory and could never be erased for the rest of her life. She whispered, "Mom, have you seen it?" Tang Mansion. A woman in luxurious clothes bowed slightly to the young woman in front of her and asked, "I wonder why Princess Anyang came here this time." Princess Anyang tilted her head, looked into Tang Shui's eyes, and said, "Mrs. Tang, to be honest, my mother came to the capital 2 days ago, and she asked me to come because she hadn't seen Aunt Xiao for many years. Please ask Auntie Xiao to come home and talk about it." The woman thought for a moment, looked at Tang Shui, and said, "Since it is the princess's request, Shui-er, go and ask your sister-in-law." "Did Princess Anyang give it to me?" Tang Ning took an invitation from Ching-er and asked in surprise, "Are you sure it's not a joke?" This chapter is first published like Have Voice Novel Network. Please remember the URL. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 231. Tang Ning was somewhat puzzled. Princess Anyang had only sent one invitation. However, this was not the first time he had received an invitation from Princess Anyang. Perhaps this time, she did not invite a woman. Princess Anyang was often in the capital, and many young men respected her. Xiaoju leaned against the door and asked, "Why haven't you sent your wedding invitations yet?" Tang Ning had not planned to invite many people, and it would be too late to send the wedding invitations 3 days in advance. However, since Xiaoju was here, he could just take it back himself. Tang Ning took out a wedding invitation from the drawer and handed it to him. After Xiaoju took it, he looked at him and asked, "How can you be so careless? At least send a servant to deliver it to the Xiao mansion, right?" There was no servant to run errands at their house for the time being, and there were not many people anyway. Tang Ning planned to deliver all the invitations personally. He looked at Xiaoju and asked, "By the way, what's the reason for Princess Anyang's banquet tomorrow night?" "Princess Anyang has a banquet tomorrow night." Xiaoju looked at him in surprise. "I don't know." Tang Ning asked in confusion, "Didn't she invite you?" Xiaoju shook his head and said, "No. This is a bit strange. Princess Anyang doesn't make sense to invite him but not Xiaoju. If she is inviting a Nujinshi, Xiaoju is also invited. In addition, as a young master, he has been the most popular among the young talents in the capital recently. No one can miss him." Xiaoju looked at him suspiciously and said, "As far as I know, Princess Anyang doesn't have any banquet tomorrow. Princess Fu will definitely accompany Princess Anyang when she comes to Beijing this time. How can she have time to invite a banquet?" He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Where did the princess invite you?" Tang Ning looked at the invitation. The address was Princess Anyang's mansion. Xiaoju picked up the invitation and looked at it. When he looked at Tang Ning again, his expression was a little uneasy. "The princess came to Beijing, and Princess Anyang invited you to the princess's mansion instead of others. Did you do something I don't know?" After Xiaoju's analysis, not to mention him, even Tang Ning couldn't help but wonder if there was any adultery between them, but he and Princess Anyang had only met once, and they had never spoken to each other, so there was definitely no adultery. Ching ran in from outside and said, "Son-in-law, there is another letter here. I almost forgot about it just now." "There is another letter." Xiaoju looked over immediately. The envelope was empty, without a single word written on it. Tang Ning opened the envelope and found only a small note inside. "Enter from the back door of the princess's mansion tomorrow." I'll wait for you. Xiaoju looked at him and couldn't help saying, you're getting married soon, and you're hooking up with a princess. How immoral of you. Tang Ning looked down again and saw that the note was signed by Tang Shui. Xiaoju was stunned for a moment, then looked at him and said, I know there's a miracle doctor in the capital who has inherited the art of massage and bone setting. Do you want me to keep an eye out for him? Tang Ning looked at him with a slightly confused look. Xiaoju explained, there was a guy in the capital who eloped with his own sister. Later, he was caught by his family and his legs were broken. It was the miracle doctor who reconnected them. However, you're not relatives, so your legs won't necessarily be broken. Anyway, I'll keep an eye out for you. Tang Ning looked at him and said bluntly, get lost. He probably guessed why Tang Shui asked him to meet at the princess's mansion in Anyang, and he also knew why she didn't tell him herself. When he agreed to her, he had actually thought about it, but he didn't expect her to arrange it so quickly. No matter how long it takes, he still has to meet the young lady of the Tang family. Even if he can't think of how to face her, he still has to meet the person he should meet. Xiaoju shook his head and said, to be honest, even if you are her cousin, she is too good to you. She is too good to be a witch in the capital. Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju and asked uncertainly, which? The word which can be used on Su Mei and Tang Yao Yao, but it is hard to imagine using it on the considerate and gentle Tang Shui. Xiaoju looked at him in surprise, you don't know. Tang Ning shook her head and said, she is quite gentle, how can she be called the witch of the capital? Gentle, Xiaoju said as if he had heard the biggest joke in the world, from childhood to adulthood, which famous playboy in the capital has not been bullied by her? The word gentle will never belong to her in her life. Tang Ning did not believe the rumors, but only believed his own eyes. Although Tang Shui was sometimes violent, she was always very gentle to him, and she would not even speak loudly. Tang Ning would not associate the word witch with her. At the Tang family, Tang Yao Yao stood in the yard, touched Zhongyi with her shoulder, looked at the pavilion, and asked, what's wrong with him? Zhongyi looked at Tang Ning, who had been sitting in the pavilion for an hour, and said, don't disturb my husband, let him be alone for a while. Mysterious. Tang Yao Yao whispered, but still did not walk over. Tang Ning's eyes were unfocused, staring blankly at something when a figure slowly walked into the pavilion. Xiao Xiao looked at him and said, brother, are you thinking about your family? Hearing Xiao Xiao's words, Tang Ning felt much better and said with a smile, you, Sister Xiao Yi, and Sister Xiao are all my family. Xiao Xiao smiled and said, and Sister Yao Yao, Sister Qing Yi are. This was the first time Tang Ning saw her smile. He patted her head gently and said, brother is going out for a while. You stay at home and he will bring you delicious food when he comes back. Xiao Xiao nodded obediently. Princess Anyang is the daughter of Prince Fu, who is the younger brother of the current emperor. He is enfeoffed and only returns to the capital during royal ceremonies every year. Princess Anyang was favored by the Queen Mother and had stayed in the capital since she was a child. Tang Ning inquired about Princess Anyang's mansion, carefully walked around to the back door, and knocked lightly. Squeak. The small door was opened the next moment. Tang Shui stood behind the door, looked at him, and whispered, come in. Tang Ning stood at the door. After thinking for a while, she stepped in. Next to Tang Shui stood a woman dressed in luxurious clothes. Tang Ning cupped her fist slightly and said, I have met the princess. No need to be polite. Princess Anyang looked at him and smiled, you can come with me. Tang Ning and Tang Shui followed Princess Anyang and did not take the main path paved with blue bricks. Instead, they walked around a deep garden and after a long time they arrived in front of a courtyard. Princess Anyang looked at him and said, it's inside. You can go in by yourself. The courtyard door is ajar. Tang Ning took a step forward, paused, and then took it back. Tang Shui's expression changed slightly and he looked at him nervously. Tang Ning looked up, took a deep breath, and pushed the door open. Tang Shui didn't walk in, but kept looking at the courtyard. Princess Anyang looked at her, sighed, and said, "Your Tang family owes him too much. What if he doesn't want to recognize you?" Tang Shui lowered his head and remained speechless. Tang Ning walked into the courtyard and looked around. Only the room in front was lit. He stood in the courtyard for a while before walking over. When he reached the door, he paused for a moment. After an unknown amount of time, he finally raised his hand and knocked on the door. "Come in, come in." A woman's voice came from inside the house, and he could tell that the voice was trembling. He took a deep breath again, pushed the door open, and when he raised his head, he saw a figure standing in front of the table. The figure turned its back to him and slowly turned around. King Gli woman looked at him, her voice trembling slightly, "Ning-er." Tang Ning raised her head and saw a haunting face that had only appeared in dreams for more than 10 years. His mind went blank, as if he had been struck by lightning. Tang Ning's body was shaking violently, and her eyes were already wet. She looked at the figure in front of her dreamily and said in a trembling voice, "Mom."